is a map that hangs in the office of every logistics executive, every shipping line CEO, every port authority director in the world. It shows the arteries of global commerce, the red lines that represent the flow of goods, the containers, the cargo, the raw materials and finished products that move between continents and keep civilization functioning. For 70 years, those red lines have converged on the same points: Los Angeles, Long Beach, Seattle, New York, Savannah, the great American ports, the gateways where Asia meets North America, where Europe connects to the Pacific, where the physical geography of trade has made the United States the indispensable hub of global commerce. If you are a container of electronics manufactured in Shenzhen and destined for a retailer in Hamburg, you have spent the last half-century traveling the same route across the Pacific, into an American port, onto an American rail line, across the American continent, into an American Atlantic port, onto a ship to Europe. American cranes lift you, American trains carry you, American workers process you, American companies charge fees at every step. And the cities that grew up around those ports, the longshoremen, the truckers, the warehouse workers, the restaurants and schools and neighborhoods that exist because cargo flows through American territory, all of that economic life depends on those red lines running through the United States. This morning at 6:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Mark Carney erased those red lines and drew new ones that do not touch the United States. The Canadian government released detailed plans for the North Atlantic Pacific Trade Corridor, an $85 billion infrastructure project backed by an additional $120 billion from 42 allied nations, designed to move goods between Asia and Europe through Canadian territory while completely, permanently, deliberately bypassing the United States of America. New ports on Canada's Pacific coast, expanded rail lines through the Canadian Rockies, modernized Atlantic gateways closer to Europe than any American port, digital customs systems faster than anything the U.S. operates, and binding long-term commitments from 9 of the world's 10 largest shipping companies to redirect cargo through Canada instead of through the United States. Within 5 years, according to Canada's projections, 60% of containerized cargo currently moving between Asia and Europe via North American routes will flow through Canada. Not through Los Angeles, not through Long Beach, not through Seattle or New York or Savannah, through Vancouver, through Prince Rupert, through Halifax and Montreal, past the United States, around the United States, as if the United States were not there. $400 billion in annual trade, rerouted. The port fees, the transportation jobs, the warehousing employment, the logistics revenue that currently sustains American cities from the Pacific to the Atlantic. All of it being deliberately, systematically, permanently redirected to Canadian infrastructure that is being built right now with international money under long-term contracts that will not expire for 15 years. And here is the part that should stop you cold. Here is the part that separates this from every other escalation in this crisis. This cannot be reversed. You can reverse a tariff with a signature. You can reverse an embargo with a phone call. You can reverse a financial restriction with an executive order, but you cannot reverse a port. You cannot unbuild a rail line. You cannot unsign a 15-year shipping contract. You cannot unpour concrete. Infrastructure is permanent. Infrastructure creates its own gravity. Once cargo flows through a new route, the economics of that route improve. Lower marginal costs, better utilization, more frequent service. The new route becomes cheaper, the old route becomes more expensive, and the shift accelerates. Not because anyone is punishing the United States, because the math favors the new route, because the infrastructure exists, because the contracts are signed, because physics and economics do not care about politics. Trump spent a month trying to force Canada into submission. Carney spent that same month designing Canada's permanent independence. And this morning, he showed the world the blueprints. The global economy is being physically rewired, and the United States is being cut out of the wiring. In this breakdown, I am going to walk you through every component of Canada's infrastructure plan and show you how each one is designed to make a specific American port, a specific American rail corridor, a specific American logistics hub obsolete. I am going to show you the shipping company commitments and why 9 of the world's 10 largest carriers chose Canadian routes over American routes. I am going to reveal the economic impact projections and why American port cities are facing the worst structural decline since the collapse of the Rust Belt. I am going to explain why this infrastructure investment is permanent, why it cannot be reversed even if the US-Canada relationship is fully repaired, and what that permanence means for every American city that depends on trade flowing through its harbor. I am going to show you what happened in Washington this morning and why the government has no tools to prevent the cargo shift. And I am going to give you 3 scenarios for what North American trade geography looks like in 2030, because the map is being redrawn right now and the United States is not holding the pen. Subscribe to join the community, leave a comment so we can keep the conversation going, and share this video because this is not a trade dispute. This is the physical restructuring of how goods move around the planet. And if you live in a port city, work in logistics, drive a truck, operate a warehouse, or buy anything that arrives by ship, which is everything, this will change your life. Let me walk you through the 4 components of the North Atlantic Pacific Trade Corridor because each one was designed with surgical precision to replace a specific piece of American trade infrastructure. This is not a general investment plan. This is an architectural blueprint for making the United States commercially irrelevant to Asia-Europe trade. Component 1, the Pacific Gateway. Canada is investing $32 billion in expanding 2 ports on its Pacific coast, the Port of Vancouver and the Port of Prince Rupert. Vancouver, you know, it is already a major port. It currently handles approximately 3.5 million 20-foot equivalent units, TEUs, the standard measure of container cargo, annually. The expansion will increase capacity to 12 million TEUs annually by 2028. New container terminals, deeper channels to accommodate the largest vessels afloat, automated cargo handling systems that reduce labor costs and processing time, expanded rail connections to move goods inland. Prince Rupert, you may not know. And that is the genius of its inclusion. Prince Rupert sits roughly 500 miles north of Vancouver on Canada's Pacific coast. It is the closest North American port to Asia. A container ship sailing from Shanghai to Prince Rupert travels approximately 500 nautical miles, less than the same ship sailing to Los Angeles. That distance translates to 1.5 to 2 days of sailing time. In the shipping industry, where fuel costs run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars per voyage and delivery speed determines contract awards, 1.5 days is not a minor advantage. It is a decisive competitive edge. Prince Rupert is currently a modest port. That is about to change. The $32 billion investment will transform it into a deep-water megaport capable of handling the largest container vessels in the world, vessels that some U.S. ports cannot accommodate because their channels are not deep enough. Combined, the Pacific Gateway expansion will give Canada 12 million TEUs of Pacific coast capacity. For comparison, the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, the busiest port complex in the Western Hemisphere, currently handle approximately 19 million TEUs annually. Canada's expanded Pacific capacity will be roughly 63% of what LA Long Beach handles today. That is not a niche alternative. That is a legitimate competitor capable of absorbing a massive share of trans-Pacific cargo. And the cargo that shifts to Vancouver and Prince Rupert is cargo that no longer needs to enter the United States at all. It arrives in Canada, it moves through Canada by rail, it leaves Canada through Atlantic ports. The entire journey, Asia to Europe, occurs without a single container touching American soil, generating a single dollar in American port fees, or employing a single American worker. Component 2, the cross-Canada rail modernization. This is the spine of the entire system. Without it, the ports are just parking lots. With it, Canada becomes a land bridge between 2 oceans. Canada is investing $28 billion in upgrading the rail lines that connect Pacific ports through the Canadian Rockies to eastern Canada and Atlantic ports. The upgrades are comprehensive and designed to create a freight corridor that matches or exceeds U.S. transcontinental rail capacity, double-tracking existing single-track sections. This is critical. Single-track rail limits throughput because trains moving in opposite directions must wait for each other at passing sidings. Double tracking eliminates that bottleneck, roughly doubling the number of trains that can operate daily. Electrifying rail lines. Electric locomotives are faster, cheaper to operate, and more reliable than diesel. Electrification reduces operating costs by 30% to 40%, and reduces transit times because electric trains can maintain higher speeds on grades, a crucial advantage in the Canadian Rockies, where the terrain is the primary bottleneck for east-west rail movement. Building new high-speed freight corridors. Dedicated freight corridors that do not share track with passenger rail eliminate the scheduling conflicts that slow cargo movement in mixed-use rail systems, establishing inland logistics hubs in Calgary, Winnipeg, and Toronto. These hubs serve as sorting and distribution centers where cargo can be transferred between rail, truck, and warehousing. They are the nodes that make the corridor function as a system rather than a single line. The result: cargo can move from Vancouver to Montreal or Halifax in approximately 48 hours. That is competitive with current U.S. transcontinental rail times, and it is faster than the typical transit through the United States when you factor in border crossings, customs processing, and the congestion that plagues U.S. West Coast ports and rail corridors. 48 hours from the Pacific to the Atlantic, through a country with stable governance, transparent regulations, and a 62-nation trade alliance that guarantees harmonized customs procedures at both ends. Component 3, the Atlantic Gateway. Canada is investing $18 billion in expanding the Port of Halifax and the Port of Montreal on its Atlantic coast. Halifax has a geographic advantage that cannot be replicated by any U.S. East Coast port. It is the closest major North American port to Europe. A ship leaving Halifax for Rotterdam travels approximately 400 nautical miles less than a ship leaving New York for the same destination. That distance advantage means Halifax to Europe transit is 12 to 18 hours faster than New York to Europe transit. 12 to 18 hours. In global shipping, where just-in-time supply chains are measured in hours and retailers track container positions in real time, 12 to 18 hours is the difference between winning a contract and losing it. The expansion will increase Atlantic port capacity from 1.2 million TEUs annually to 6 million TEUs by 2028. That capacity is designed specifically for one purpose: receiving cargo that arrive from Asia via the Pacific Gateway and the Cross-Canada Rail Corridor, loading it onto ships and sending it to Europe. Asia to Vancouver, rail to Halifax, ship to Europe, the entire journey through Canadian territory, zero American involvement. Montreal adds another dimension. The Port of Montreal sits at the head of the St. Lawrence Seaway, which provides deep water access 1,000 miles into the North American interior. Cargo arriving in Montreal can be distributed by river, rail, and truck to markets throughout eastern Canada and, if trade relations improve, into the northeastern United States. But the primary purpose is not serving the U.S. market. The primary purpose is serving the global market. Montreal to Europe, Montreal to Africa, Montreal to South America. The port is being designed as a multimodal hub that connects the Cross-Canada corridor to every maritime destination in the Atlantic. Component 4, digital trade infrastructure. This is the component that does not make headlines, but that shipping executives care about more than any port expansion or rail upgrade. Canada is investing $7 billion in customs technology, cargo tracking systems, and digital trade facilitation. The investment includes AI-powered customs processing that can clear cargo in minutes rather than hours, blockchain-based shipment tracking that provides real-time visibility to every participant in the supply chain, and harmonized regulatory systems with all 62 Democratic Trade Alliance members that reduce paperwork, eliminate duplicate inspections, and create a seamless digital corridor from Asian factory to European warehouse. For comparison, U.S. customs processing at major ports currently takes an average of 3 to 6 hours for containerized cargo, longer during peak periods or when additional inspections are required. Canadian facilities operating under the new digital system will process the same cargo in 15 to 30 minutes. The difference is not measured in hours, it is measured in money. Every hour a container sits at a port waiting for customs clearance costs the shipper approximately $150 in demurrage, storage, and opportunity cost. Multiply that by millions of containers, and the savings from faster processing become a decisive competitive advantage. Canada is not just building bigger ports. Canada is building smarter ports, ports that move cargo faster, cheaper, and with less friction than anything the United States currently operates or has planned to build. Now let me show you the shipping company commitments, because this is where the plan transforms from an aspiration into an irreversible reality. At 7:15 a.m. this morning, simultaneously with Canada's infrastructure announcement, 9 of the world's 10 largest container shipping companies issued statements committing to redirect cargo through Canada. 9 of 10, not a sample, not a minority. 9 of the 10 corporations that collectively control approximately 85% of global containerized shipping. Maersk, the world's largest shipping line, signed a 15-year agreement making Vancouver and Halifax primary North American ports of call for Asia-Europe services. 15 years, a commitment that extends to 2041. A commitment that will outlast multiple presidential administrations, multiple economic cycles, multiple geopolitical realignments. MSC, the second largest. Similar commitments: CMA CGM, Costco, Hapag-Lloyd, One, Evergreen, Yangming, ChamM, all announced they are shifting cargo allocations to Canadian ports. The reasons they cited tell you everything about why this shift is happening and why it cannot be reversed. First, stability and predictability. Canada offers long-term policy stability. The United States has demonstrated policy volatility. Shipping companies invest billions in vessels, equipment, and route networks. Those investments require predictability. A country that imposes tariffs on allies, threatens to close borders, and ignores its own congressional mandates is not predictable. A country that builds infrastructure with 62 nation backing and signs 15-year port contracts is predictable. Second, preferential terms. Canadian ports are offering lower fees and expedited service to carriers that commit to long-term contracts. The infrastructure investment is partially funded by the revenue guarantees these contracts provide. It is a virtuous cycle. Long-term commitments fund infrastructure that attracts more commitments. Third, the Democratic Trade Alliance. 62 nations, harmonized customs, reduced regulatory barriers. Goods moving through Canada into the DTA network face fewer inspections, fewer delays, and fewer compliance costs than goods moving through the United States, which is not a DTA member, and whose trade relationships with most nations are currently defined by tariffs, sanctions, and uncertainty. Fourth, better infrastructure. By 2028, Canadian ports will have deeper channels, more modern equipment, faster processing, and greater capacity than many competing U.S. ports. The investment creates a competitive advantage that is physical and permanent. These commitments are not letters of intent. They are binding contracts, 15-year agreements with volume commitments, fee structures, and penalty clauses for early termination. Breaking those contracts would cost shipping companies hundreds of millions of dollars. They will not be broken because a future American president makes a phone call. The cargo is committed. The routes are set. The contracts are signed. The ships are being scheduled. By the time the first expanded berth opens at Prince Rupert, the cargo that will fill it has already been assigned. Receipt number 1, the American ports under threat. Let me translate the infrastructure plan into specific impacts on specific American cities, because this is where the abstractions become human. The Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach together form the largest port complex in the Western Hemisphere. They handle approximately 19 million TEUs annually. They directly employ over 100,000 workers. They indirectly support over 1 million jobs in the greater Los Angeles metropolitan area. Truckers, rail workers, warehouse operators, customs brokers, freight forwarders, mechanics, fuel suppliers, food service workers, and every other occupation that exists because cargo flows through the harbor. If Canada's Pacific Gateway captures 30% to 40% of trans-Pacific cargo currently entering through LA Long Beach, and the shipping company commitments suggest it will, the port complex loses 6 to 8 million TEUs annually. That translates to 300,000 to 400,000 jobs lost in the Los Angeles region. 300,000 to 400,000 jobs in one metropolitan area, not spread across the country, concentrated in the communities that surround the port: Wilmington, San Pedro, Carson, Long Beach, communities that are already among the most economically vulnerable in Southern California. Those workers do not transition to other industries overnight. Port work pays well. Longshoremen earn $80,000 to $150,000 annually with benefits. There are no comparable jobs waiting. There is no retraining program that replaces a six-figure union salary. There is only unemployment, followed by lower-paying work, followed by the economic cascade that every factory town and mining town and port town in American history has experienced when the industry that sustains it leaves. Seattle and Tacoma face proportionally similar impacts. The ports of Seattle and Tacoma handle approximately 3.5 million TEUs annually. They are the closest U.S. ports to Asia, but they are not as close as Prince Rupert. When Prince Rupert's expansion is complete, cargo that currently enters Seattle because of its proximity to Asia will shift to Prince Rupert because Prince Rupert is even closer. On the East Coast, the Port of New York and New Jersey, the Port of Savannah, and the Port of Charleston will see cargo volume declines as shippers choose Halifax for Europe-bound cargo. Halifax's geographic advantage, 12 to 18 hours closer to Europe, makes it the rational choice for any shipper whose cargo is transiting North America en route to European destinations. The Commerce Department's emergency analysis released this morning estimates that the total economic impact of the cargo shift will be devastating. $120 billion in reduced annual GDP, 600,000 to 800,000 American jobs lost, $18 billion in reduced federal tax revenue annually. And the analysis contains the sentence that should make every port worker, every city mayor, every governor of a coastal state stop what they are doing and pay attention. Once shipping routes are established through Canadian infrastructure, they will not shift back even if U.S.-Canada relations improve, because the infrastructure investments create path dependency. Path dependency, the technical term for a simple, terrifying truth. Once the new road is built, people use the new road, even if the old road reopens, even if the old road is repaired, even if the old road is free, because the new road is where the gas stations are, where the rest stops are, where the communities are, where the economy is. The new road is being built through Canada, and the old road, the American road that has carried the world's commerce for 70 years, is about to become a historical curiosity. A monument to an era when the United States was the indispensable center of global trade. An era that ended because one president decided to wage war on the country that sits between the two oceans America used to bridge. Receipt number 2, the White House reaction. Let me show you what happened when the government that caused this crisis learned about its consequences. At 8:30 a.m., Trump was briefed on the infrastructure plan. According to sources, he was told that Canada is building ports and rail lines to bypass the United States and that major shipping companies have committed to using Canadian routes. Trump reportedly asked why the U.S. cannot just block ships from entering Canadian ports. Block ships from entering Canadian ports. The President of the United States asked whether the U.S. Navy could prevent commercial cargo vessels from docking at facilities in a sovereign nation. Whether the most powerful military on earth could be deployed to stop container ships from delivering goods to a Canadian harbor. Advisors explained that the United States has no authority over international shipping and cannot prevent ships from docking at foreign ports. International maritime law, the law of the sea that has governed global commerce since the 17th century, guarantees freedom of navigation and port access. The U.S. cannot blockade Canadian ports without committing an act of war against a NATO ally. Trump reportedly said the U.S. should build better infrastructure to compete. And here is where the briefing became painful, because advisors had to explain the timeline reality that makes competing impossible. Canadian infrastructure is funded. It is contracted. It is under construction. It will be operational by 2028. U.S. infrastructure projects take 5 to 7 years from funding to completion, and that assumes funding is available, which it is not. Congress has not appropriated infrastructure money. Environmental reviews take 2 to 3 years. Permitting takes another 1 to 2 years. Construction takes 3 to 5 years. Even if Congress appropriated $200 billion today, this morning, this hour, the first new American port facility would not be operational until 2031 or 2032. By 2031, Canadian infrastructure will have been operational for 3 to 4 years. Shipping companies will have been using Canadian routes for 3 to 4 years. Supply chains will have been configured around Canadian infrastructure for 3 to 4 years. Long-term contracts will be in their 4th or 5th year of 15-year terms. The United States cannot compete because the United States cannot build fast enough. Canada has a 3 to 4 year head start. And in the shipping industry, where contracts last 15 years and route changes take decades to reverse, a 3 to 4 year head start is permanent. Trump caused this crisis in 5 weeks. The infrastructure being built to exploit it will operate for 50 years. At 9:30 a.m., the White House issued a statement. Canada's infrastructure plan is an attempt to steal American jobs and American economic activity. The United States will not allow this. That statement contains two revealing elements. First, the word steal. Canada is not stealing American jobs. Canada is building its own infrastructure on its own soil with its own money and international investment. Ships are choosing to use Canadian ports because Canadian ports offer better service, better prices, and greater stability. That is not theft. That is competition. And the United States is losing because it spent the past month destroying the stability and reliability that were its primary competitive advantages. Second, the phrase, will not allow this. How? How will the United States prevent Canada from building ports in Canada? How will the United States prevent ships from choosing Canadian routes? How will the United States prevent 62 nations from investing in Canadian infrastructure? The statement promises action it cannot deliver. It threatens consequences it cannot impose. It asserts authority it does not possess. It is the reflex of a government that still believes it controls the global economy and has not yet processed the reality that the global economy has decided to work around it. Receipt number 3, the permanent nature of the shift. I need you to understand why the word permanent appears repeatedly in every analysis of this infrastructure plan, because it is the word that separates this action from everything else Canada has done during this crisis. Tariffs can be removed in a day. Financial restrictions can be lifted in a week. Currency interventions can be paused with a phone call. Diplomatic relationships can be rebuilt over months or years. Infrastructure cannot be unbuilt. Once the port of Prince Rupert is expanded, those berths exist. They do not disappear if U.S.-Canada relations improve. They sit there, ready to receive ships, competitive on price and geography, available to every shipping line in the world. Once the cross-Canada rail corridor is double-tracked and electrified, those tracks exist. They carry cargo at lower cost and higher speed than before. They do not get unelectrified because a new American president offers Canada a better trade deal.